Welcome to the City Council meeting of February the 4th, 2013. Let us please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silent meditation. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. In accordance with LB 898, a copy of the Open Meetings Act is posted in the back of the chamber. The order of business of the City Council today is as follows. The clerk will call items listed on the agenda under public hearing. Anyone wishing to speak on an item should come forward at that time when the clerk reads that item. The applicant and those in favor should speak first, and those opposed, the applicant may then make one short rebuttal. Each speaker then begins by stating your name, your address, and whether you're speaking in favor or in opposition to the item. Testimony is limited to 5 minutes per speaker. After all public hearings, the council will then vote on resolutions and items listed under third reading. On the second and last meetings of the month, immediately prior to adjournment, anyone may speak on an issue not on the agenda for that date, nor planned for a future agenda. And this is not an open meeting night. That would be next week, right? Okay. Joan, please call the first item.
Under public hearing consent agenda, we have items 1 through 7. Anyone wishing to address an item on the consent agenda may do so at this time.
Anyone wishing to speak on one of the first 7 items, please come forward. Seeing none, next item.
Concluding public hearing consent agenda, the public hearing liquor resolutions none, the public hearing ordinances second reading, item 8. Authorizing the issuance of not to exceed $9 million aggregate principal amount of solid waste management revenue and refunding bonds and related matters.
Pepka City Finance Department. With me today are Scott Keene from Emeritus Investment Corp., Lauren Wismer and Mike Rogers from Gilmore and Bell, and present is Fran Major from Public Works and Utilities. Today before you is an ordinance for $9 million maximum of refunding and revenue bonds for solid waste management, which is our sanitary landfill. And I think I'll turn it over to Scott to go over the details of the financing, and Lauren and Mike are here to answer any questions on the ordinance itself.
Thanks, Steve. Good afternoon. As Steve mentioned, we are looking at issuing up to not to exceed $9 million of solid waste management revenue bonds, the purpose of which is to fund approximately $5.7 million of improvements at the landfill and refund the only other outstanding solid waste revenue bonds of the city, the Series 2006 bonds. There's still approximately $2.8 million of those bonds outstanding, and they have an average rate of approximately 4.17%. In today's market, we could refund them with bonds that would have a rate of about 2.25%. So there's a significant room for savings. We estimate that at today's market, we could save about $22,000 per year on the remaining 8 years on this bond issue. So present value savings are about $178,000, which represent about 6.3% of the outstanding par amount of bonds. These bonds aren't callable until August of 2013. So this refund would be considered an advanced refunding, and typically we like to target present value savings of at least 5% for an advanced refunding. Again, the IRS only allows us to advance refund a bond issue once, so we have a little higher level of targeted savings. So we're shooting for a minimum level of 5% present value savings. We're a little over 6% present value savings right now, so it's pretty close. I wouldn't describe this. We were averaging over 12% present value savings on a lot of the refundings that we did last year. So this one isn't as strong as that, but given the fact that we're in the midst of doing this new money financing, it certainly makes good sense to look at refinancing the 2006 bonds, and that's what we're proposing. The ordinance itself has a certain number of parameters. We have a maximum true interest cost on the new financing of 3.5%, All told, with the new money and the refunding portions, we're currently at about 2.9%. So we still have a little room to go. Rates could run up a little bit, and we'd still be able to proceed with the financing. We've designated a maximum underwriter's discount of 1%. As I mentioned earlier, a minimum level of present value savings to the refunding of 5%. And we need to have the financing completed by June of 2013. We expect to have this going forward fairly quickly. We are currently planning for these bonds to be sold through a negotiated sale, but if interest rates rise between now and the time that we anticipate going to market, we might look at pulling out the refunding portion, just doing the new money portion, and at that point may do that on a negotiated basis or on a competitive sale basis. We have conference calls scheduled with the rating agencies next week. We expect them to affirm our outstanding AA+, AA2 ratings, which are obviously very, very strong, and expect to have a very good sale 2 weeks later. With that, I'll turn it over to Lauren and Mike.
Okay.
Lauren Wismer, Gilmore and Bell, and with me today is Mike Rogers, also with Gilmore and Bell, someone younger and smarter than I, who actually had the laboring oar in drafting the ordinance. So if you have any questions, I'll let you ask him.
Hi, Mike Rogers, Gilmore and Bell. Happy to be here. Thank you. As Scott mentioned, the ordinance authorizes bonds not to exceed $9 million in principal amount, in part to refund the 2006 bonds and also in part to finance new improvements. There are certain parameters in there that Scott also mentioned, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Diana?
Yes, if I might, of any of you, what are the kind of improvements that we're talking about? Is there anything that you can, is it a long, involved story, or can you succinctly tell us what kind of improvements?
Fran Major, Public Works Utilities. We're doing a Phase 12 liner, that's 3.2 millions, a Phase 5 cap at $1.5 million, and an access roadway for $1 million. Part of this roadway is currently rocked and they want to pave it.
Okay,
So that's a total of 5.7, and the rest is the refinancing.
thank you.
Okay.
Other questions? John?
And again, the refinancing was 2.7 million? Is that-
2.8 million is what's currently outstanding. That's correct.
Okay, so that'd be the 8.5 roughly.
Yep.
And then a question, if I may. You mentioned that right now you're estimating a present value savings of 178,000, which is about 6%. Now, have you figured in all your costs of reissuing and putting
Yes,
it out?
that's
So that's a
correct.
net savings?
It is. That's savings after paying all of the costs of issuance. And we've currently estimated a little high for all of those costs of issuance as well. So we expect the savings to be a little bit better than that if interest rates hold.
Thank you.
Other questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Very much. Thank you.
Anyone else here wishing to speak regarding this item, please come forward. In favor? In opposition? Next item, Joan.
Item 9 is change of zone 10014A, application of Union Bank to amend the Northwoods Plaza planned unit development to change the number of dwelling units from 80 to 150 on property generally located at North 84th Street and Holdridge Street.
Good afternoon, members of the council. Danae Kalkowski appearing today on behalf of the applicant and potential buyer of the property. The item before you today involves the southwest corner of the Northwoods commercial development that's located at the southwest corner of 84th and Holdridge. I want to start with just a really brief history of this site because I think it's helpful in trying to show you where we're at today. The entire Northwoods area was zoned B2 clear back in December of 1996. It was part of the Region Heights 2 annexation agreement, which involved about 250 acres on the west side of 84th Street. It started south of Holdridge and went all the way to the north side of Layton. So it involved commercial and residential developments. So as part of that annexation agreement, all of the infrastructure and the stormwater detention was master planned for this site in addition to the other acres included. In February then of 1998, a use permit was approved on this site, a B2 use permit, and that was amended, it looks like, in 2009 to increase the amount of square footage that could be allowed. But what I really want to talk to you today about, to kind of set up where our amendment is going, is in 2010 there was an application that came in. to change a portion of the property, kind of the southwest corner of the site, from just a use permit to a B2 PUD. The owner brought in the areas that are known as Lot 8, Lot 7, and Lot 10. The purpose really of the PUD at that time was to allow some flexibility in the uses for the area, particularly to incorporate some residential options for this part of the development that wouldn't be available under the standard B2 zoning. As part of that amendment, Lot 10 was shown for a hotel and/or commercial use. Lot 8 was also commercial use and/or some residential. Lot 7, residential, could be 80 multifamily residential units, 120 retirement or elderly care, 120 domiciliary care facilities. So a multitude of uses, but really allowed the flexibility to put about 80 multifamily units and some other types of residential uses. There were multiple meetings held with the owner or the adjacent neighbors back at that time. And as a result of that, there were a couple conditions that were added to the plan. One primarily regarding that 50-foot setback along the residential neighbors to the south. That area was agreed to be kept totally green space, no drives, no buildings. The existing trees in the area were agreed to be kept, and additional trees were agreed to be added on the easternmost portion against those 5 easternmost lots. And Planning Department recognized at that time that the existing trees already met the standard for screening between commercial and residential. Back in 2010, Planning Department recommended approval of that amendment because it encouraged a mix of uses, and they concluded with the setback and the trees that there would be minimal impact on the neighbors to the south. I'm going to try and keep both of these up so you can see them a little bit. The application before you today is just really requesting some further modifications or adjustments to the PUD as it relates to the residential, which we feel, and I think planning staff supports that there really wouldn't be a lot of additional impact on the neighbors as a result of this change. What you see under the 2012-13 proposed plan is that we've combined lots 8, 7, and 10 kind of into one big lot. We're moving the hotel use off of Lot 10, right here, and it gets moved up to the area closer to Holdridge Street. And then they're requesting an increase in the multifamily density. Previously, the 80 units could have been put on Lot 7 or Lot 8. The 150 units of density we're requesting under this amendment would allow 150 units to be placed really within this larger area. So what you're doing is getting rid of the hotel use on Lot 10 and adding additional density or multifamily density to be allowed on that site. At Planning Commission, there was opposition from a couple of the neighbors on the south and a couple of the commercial neighbors. And I think you have 2 letters in your packet from neighbors with some concerns. After Planning Commission, there was a meeting held, and those neighbors and the commercial neighbors were in attendance, where we talked about the fact that a lot of this has already been approved with the 2010 amendment, so the door really had already been opened. There are 2 themes really that we were hearing at the meeting, and I think that you're seeing in your letter are, number 1, we just don't want multifamily adjacent to us. We don't think that's a good use adjacent to us, and then concern about additional traffic within the development. So let me just quickly go through those 2 items. I think the Planning Department recognizes, and general planning principles would recognize, that multifamily is a good transitional use between single-family residential and commercial uses. The current PUD already permits multifamily use on lots 7 and 8, which would be those closest already to the neighbors. They could go pull a building permit today and put 2 large 40 unit buildings on lot 7 right up adjacent to the neighborhood. That's already allowed. As part of this amendment, the same notes that were added in 2010 regarding the buffer will stay. There's no change to that. The additional trees will still be added. I think the reality is that the market has changed, and the landowners are trying to work with other appropriate transitional uses between the single family and the commercial. And while the overall density of the multifamily use would increase, because it's a larger area that the density would be spread across, we don't really feel that there would be a huge impact really on those neighbors to the south. And then the second issue really is a traffic issue. The PUD amendment really would still allow all of the uses that would already be allowed under the B2. So changing the use to allow additional multifamily density upon full development would actually result in less traffic at the site than if the area was entirely, even if it was entirely developed as office, it would still have a little more traffic than multifamily developed. If any of it was developed as retail, it would have significantly more traffic than what the multifamily does. So there's no doubt that just with developing a site that doesn't have anything on, traffic will increase. But when you look at the comparative full development, the multifamily is just not going to increase the amount of traffic generated on the site. Brad Marshall from Olson Associates is also with me here today, and he could address the traffic issue in more detail if you have additional questions about that. I think just to conclude, I think multifamily is an appropriate transitional use. I think what we're trying to do is just recognize the market changes and the reality of the world that we're living in today. There's just not the market for the office space that there used to be, and so this would be a good transitional use for the property. Planning Commission did approve the application, and we would be asking for your approval also. And I'd be happy to answer any questions, or Brad is here today too. So,
Okay. Questions? Gene?
Danae, the approved hotel on lot 10 would allow 86 rooms?
6 rooms.
3-story or 2-story? You don't know? Just square footage, I suspect. Was there a height?
I don't. Do you know what that was, Brad?
There actually is a height limitation. The standard zoning is up to 40 feet, which there were actually waivers provided up to 55 feet for the hotel.
So that would be the same as the proposed multifamily, 50 feet?
There's actually a stipulation here, it's up to 50 feet, and then for every foot above 50 to 55 feet, there have to be additional buffer provided from the south property line.
Okay. And so then you had 86 hotel rooms, and then you had 80 units approved for 7 or
8.
So
the
then
time.
you would have had 160 units with still being able to build up to the 50-foot height. And now you're asking for just 150
Yes. For multifamily.
for multifamily, not
Would
any
still-
higher.
Right. It would still allow, if multifamily went away, it'd still go back and allow the commercial uses on that site and or the office uses on that site, the B2 uses. But if you were doing multifamily residential, maximum density for that entire area would be 150 units.
And then the buildings, the new buildings, you're talking about how many buildings for the multifamily?
I don't know that they have definitive plans prepared yet, but I, from what I've seen in the past, conceptually was like 4.
Conceptually, yeah, at this time.
With the same 2,
Would there be, I'm assuming, a change in the road network around those buildings versus what's there now?
There would be, there's been some preliminary site design for the apartment layouts for the different buildings. The lot essentially would be sold as one contiguous lot to the purchaser, and the buildings, the parking, everything would be then configured to operate just solely for the apartment complex.
Okay, and one last question for me. As far as access, you can access it off the road on the southeast corner of the development, or not?
You are not.
You cannot.
You cannot. That was one of the discussions back in 2010 when the original PUD amendment came through, was if Public Works or the residents would allow a drive be put back there. It was heavily opposed, and it is not being sought at this time.
Okay.
As well.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yes, Diana?
Yes. Dana, can you tell me how does traffic move in and out of here now? I'm not sure I understand it, and that seemed to be one of the concerns that
concern
had
with the overall site.
some validity.
There's an access point in off of 84th Street. No left out at 84th Street. 84th Street has controlled access from the state, and way back in the 90s would only allow the right in but not the right out, or the left out, excuse me. And you've got the internal access here. The full access opening to, if somebody wants to go out and turn left, is really here at Holdridge Street.
Okay,
Then you come down, you have the roundabout, which provides the access, primary access down into this area.
that area that would be the apartment houses.
Under the new plan, it's one big lot.
Is there, the neighbors over to the west there, how do they access the area?
There is no, this is a big drainage way through here.
Okay.
There's a lot of stormwater that's coming down that area, so there is no direct connection in. They'd probably have to come down through the neighborhood down in here to
I
the
see.
south and make a connection. Or they take a right out on Holdridge and are right back, right into the site.
Okay. So really, the people that will be most impacted by the traffic that is going to be there eventually would be those neighbors right to the south. They would be the ones most impacted? If, I mean, it depends on how you consider whether they're impacted or not, but
Right, because
they
most
would
of the traffic would be coming
affected,
in
let's say that.
without,
Not affect them.
you know, without coming down in front of them. Now, it may impact, if they come through here to get out and go on Holdridge, it may impact their ability to make a left turn lane on Holdridge. But technically, traffic coming in and out of the
Left in off
retail center is not really going to be driving a lot in front of their house. I don't think the concern for these neighbors was largely traffic. The concern for these neighbors was apartments.
Okay.
The traffic concern came more from the two little office users,
Okay,
internal.
thank you.
Thank you. Other questions, John?
Yeah. Danae, how deep are those lots for the single family again from the street? Is that kind of any idea, just to kind of anticipate what type of backyard they would have? And then if you'd again state what the setback would be on any units there at the north?
Their standard depth, 110 to 120.
That'd be my guess.
foot
When you look at the
depth.
50-foot setback, it's probably just a little over double the 50-foot setback that we have shown in the back there.
Okay.
Doug?
Danae, there's not a left turn in off of 84th to there, is there?
Not a left out. You can
Not a
turn,
left
you can
turn
turn left
coming in?
going into the site. If you're coming north on 84th Street, you can make a left into the site, but you cannot make a left going north out.
If you want to go across 2 lanes of traffic and,
Yeah, jump the horse, whatever they call it, pork
yeah,
chop. I don't think so.
that's not a real, that would not be convenient entry from the left, from the south on 84th Street.
84th Street's a great entrance because you can come left or you can come right in at 84th Street. So if I'm coming north on 84th Street, I can make a left in right by the convenience store.
It's not controlled though, there.
Not the left in. The
Correct.
left, trying to pull out of the site, I can't pull out of the site
Right,
and go
correct.
north.
But, so if you're left there and you have the hill, it is not convenient to turn left into that facility. So that almost forces you to go around the corner and come in on, and if you're coming from the north, you're clearly not gonna go all the way up there, you're gonna turn on Holdridge and come, so it's gonna force most of the traffic in and out has got to come off of Holdridge Street.
Okay. I always come in off of 84th, Doug.
Maybe your guts here. How about access? If we find out there's an issue there, if this is approved and we find out there's an issue there, how about traffic signals? I have some concerns about people coming.
I think the traffic signal issue you'd have to address with Public Works. I don't believe that ultimately in the master plan, when this Region Heights 2 area came through and they did the traffic studies, that there was a signal shown at the location there in Holdridge Street because of its proximity to 84th. And there were lots of discussions with the state at that time for trying to make a bigger, better intersection on 84th, and we didn't get very far with them. So I think you're somewhat limited. It'd be a question for Public Works on the signal issue at Holdridge.
Reasonably, if you're coming out of there in the morning or during traffic, you're going to have a hard time getting out of that intersection. I mean, period. So if we're not going to have that discussion, my fear is that people will get frustrated trying to get out and then try to rush themselves out into Holdridge, and we're going to get somebody. Bam! That's a lot of cars, and I know you have a study that shows that the traffic will be no more or no less with the apartments, but the businesses would normally be open 10 hours a day, and now we're going to go to really an issue with maybe 2 cars an apartment in today's society and rushing them out
Right.
there 24/7.
In some ways, though, the apartment may provide a better mix of traffic coming in and out than to have additional retail and office down there, which has the peak hour times that are the same traffic peaks that the rest of the center is experiencing for trying to get out and turn left on Holdridge. So, I mean, in some ways, a multifamily use on this is better in a lot of ways besides just overall trips to the site. But I can't argue with you, it's hard to make a left turn out across a major arterial street anywhere in the city. And all I can tell you is when this site was master planned and the study was prepared, it planned for this amount of traffic, and these were the entrances and the exits.
Other questions? No? Okay, thank you. Anyone else here wishing to speak in favor of this item? Anyone in opposition? Please come forward.
Matt and Jennifer Jonas live at 8230 Rainy River Road, which is, I don't know if it's going to show on there.
Would you repeat your names again, please?
Matt and Jennifer Jonas.
Thank you.
We're actually the second house.
We live on the
If you leave that map,
south.
it'll be picked up there. Just set it there. There you go.
We live on the adjoining property to the south, and our main concerns are the traffic, because our only way out in the mornings when we want to go north is to go up the street and then come out.
Thanks, yeah, thank you.
Is to come up, go on the west side of the convenience store, across by Legends, down the hill, through the roundabout, and out to Holdridge. And the corner up by Legends and Runza right up in here is a very, very tight corner. There are times when there's pickups with trailers that have to stop and back up, or you have to stop and back up. I've seen trucks not be able to make it up. The wintertime, just this last snowstorm, that road going up and down that hill is a solid sheet of ice. And to sit and wait in the mornings now to cross Holdridge Street, there's times where you have to wait 3 to 5 minutes because of traffic on Holdridge Street for you to make your exit out. And with the added 150 units, most units, you're gonna have at least 2 cars, if not up to 4 cars per apartment. And the additional traffic, the safety is the major issue. We feel that we're not against development by any means, but this is just the wrong type of development for this area.
Okay.
I mean, the safety, what about, as far as, I know there's a 50-foot buffer, but what's to prevent people from, if the parking lot's full, from coming around parking on our side and going through our lots, through the trees to access the apartments too, as far as parking goes. It's just not a very good situation, and we're not the only people along Rainy River, as you can tell. Cal Pifo and Roy Shelton and Steve and Andy and Tracy McCoy have all voiced their opinions on this as far as the safety and just the overall privacy. You put a 3-story apartment building right up against our backyard, we have no privacy. If it's normal residential, you got privacy, but you got somebody in the third story, they're looking right down on you the whole time off their balcony. So that was our major concerns.
Okay, thank you. Lloyd?
Now that this has been expanded on our screen, would you trace out how you leave again from your lot?
Sure. I actually live right here,
Okay.
and so I come up Rainy River Road, and I come, and then right here is the convenience store, the U-Stop, and up here is 84th Street.
Right.
So when I come up and I come along the street, and then right here is Legends, come down, go, then you got the roundabout, and then right here to Holdridge Street. To make either a left or a right, depending if I want to go north on 84th, then I have to make a right and go up Holdridge Street and use the light, because when you come out this way, like they said previously, you cannot make a left turn. I've seen people do it. They've jumped the medians and everything else, but there have been accidents already at this intersection coming off North Woods Drive to Holdridge Street. Especially in the mornings, you know, you got a lot of traffic that's coming east on Holdridge Street to gain access to 84th Street, and it's time consuming. And our feelings are with all the added traffic from the apartment, and then you put a 86-room hotel in there, you're just asking for disaster. So.
Okay.
Thank you.
Diana?
I think Carl's next,
Gene?
or Gene's next.
I don't know, is on 80th and Holdridge, can you turn and go west out of 80th Street?
Yes, you can.
Do you go that way at times? Versus-
Very, very seldom, because we'd have to go down here over 3 blocks and then kind of angle back around and then come back down in front of residential. And so you're still at the same point. You're only, it's not even a full block from where this exit is on the 84th versus right here. I mean, it's just basically across that
Right,
waterway.
I was just wondering, going out on Northwoods Drive route, you have across the street is the grocery store. If that's really busy, if 80th Street provides an easier route out, I don't know.
Not really, because you still have to wait for traffic. I mean, it's still waiting for traffic. I mean, it would provide another access, but it's going to take time as well.
Okay.
And like I said, I've seen at least 3 or 4 accidents at that intersection there with people trying to cross Holdridge Street there, because Holdridge Street is 4 lanes right through there and the turn lane.
And
So-
plus there's that hill. There's a hill coming down.
And it's kind of blind with the traffic coming from the east. It is kind of a blind spot there where you got to pull off in Northwoods onto Holdridge.
Diana?
Yes, this is probably not possible, I don't know if it is or not, but if a traffic light were put there on 84th Street that would allow
On 84th
you
or on
all to
Holdridge?
turn-
On Holdridge.
No, on 84th, so that you all could turn left when you left your homes, so that you would go out that other exit. Would that be helpful?
I don't think the city would do that because it is so close to the intersection of 84th and Holdridge.
I'm guessing you're right.
Because when that light is red, traffic will back up to that
Ah.
intersection there already.
So that wouldn't be a
No.
solution? Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Several years ago, we enacted a measure that allows U-turns at lights. Just thinking out loud here, if you're going up to Holdridge, I assume, well, that there are a number of people that want to make a destination to the west. Would that be a fair assumption? How does it help? I know you said there's some backing up into the development, but if you get out on Holdridge and then going to 84th, do a U-turn at that point, because you're looking at about 2 blocks. And does that, I mean, you've got that now.
Right, but you still, I mean, there are, on Holdridge Street, there's no left and right turn arrows, and the lights are pretty short, and there's quite a bit of traffic coming from the east, so you theoretically really don't have a lot of time to make a U-turn at that light because it's green east and west at the same time.
And is there a single, I'm trying to remember, there's a single turn lane?
Single left turn lane, yes.
And I would add on to Ms. Schimmick and what you were saying too, that putting a light that close to 84th and Holdridge on either street is a problematic thing for the
Right,
engineers.
and I know that we talked to, when we had our meetings 2 years ago, about the possibility of a light down here, but they said that would be up to Public Works. And they didn't feel it would be a good option because of how the proximity is close to 84th and Holdridge as well. And you know, with the grocery store and all that, you got traffic coming from the north that are so you gotta wait for basically traffic from 3 different directions to make a left turn out of the property.
Well, just a follow-up on the U-turn thing. Were you talking about, you would turn from Northwoods Drive right onto 84th, so
No.
you'd be heading south? Well, I'm asking about the U-turn
Well, you
issue.
could
because
do it that way, too.
And
I
then
was
U-turn sometime within the next couple blocks to go back north.
That would be one element. Good question. The other was, though, to go to Holdridge, head east, and then do a U-turn at 84th and Holdridge, and to then go around and go west.
Oh,
That
for
what
west.
you originally yes.
That's what I was.
That was what you were talking about, and I'm thinking the
But
other
there is the
location.
alternative that you mentioned, Mr. Cook, that go south and then turn back north if somebody wanted.
I mean, but it doesn't look like there are good U-turn options for, well, a long ways along there. Something would have to be created, and I
I think
don't
that
know.
Jonas has brought up a good point with a single left turn lane at 84th and Holdridge. It works better if you, in a big intersection like this, if you had dual left turns, so the most northern could then do it and the others could.
You know, the other thing is the island that is along Holdridge Street, it comes out so far that if you were to make a left-hand turn, you almost got to kind of swing out into 84th to be able to make the turn. And especially without the turn arrows, you're always waiting for traffic, because in the mornings when you go to come out on Holdridge to make a left onto 84th, without a turn light, there might be enough time for 4 cars to make a left turn, maybe 5, because there's traffic coming from the east without the left turn lines. Like I said, they're both green, east and west at the same time.
Would it be appropriate to have Ms. Esposito to come up now, or do we want to ask staff after? I think maybe we can dialogue here for a minute. Would you mind?
Vicki Esposito, Director of Public Works and Utilities. It sounds like we don't have warrants met at this intersection of 84th.
Would you explain those just for the benefit of the Jonases and the audience?
Or, I'm sure that there's probably a distance issue as well, but the state requires that certain components exist for traffic volumes, and that they're called warrants. If those warrants are met, then Public Works can go ahead and install a traffic signal at this location. But what I'm guessing is that those traffic volumes don't exist there. And so we're sort of stuck with a light at Holdridge. Like Mr. Camp was saying, a U-turn would be your option on 84th Street, or turning right onto Holdridge and making a U-turn there. But we don't have an option here to put in a light.
Yeah.
Ms. Esposito, on the width there of Holdridge, for example, just focusing on that for a moment, is there the possibility of at some point having a dual left turn
It looks
going
like
north?
from the, and I didn't bring Randy Hoskins with me, I do apologize, but it looks like there could be a future possibility of that, the way that it looks from this aerial. I can also have some analysis of what's going on at the next traffic light on North 84th to see if there was potential for a green arrow, or what the future build out of that would be. But without our traffic engineer here, I don't have an immediate answer.
Would it be reasonable to assume that at some point, as this area keeps developing, that there might be an arrowed left turn going north?
We've done adjustments in the field like that plenty of times. I think our recent one was at Van Dorn and 40th Street, which helps for school traffic during those peak hours. So we've made installations like that. We would just have to take a look at those things.
And can you time those, like you were just saying, peak hours? So maybe during the
Sure.
day, it doesn't have the signaled left turn, but it'd be at, say, 7 to 9 or something when there's heavier volume.
Or maybe it's just a matter of keeping a green light longer so that you move those traffic volumes through, or move those cars through. But again, I'd have to have the traffic engineers take a real close look, but maybe there's some other possible solutions there.
Thank you.
Okay, Jonathan?
Well, yeah, we can't engineer this today, I suppose.
Right.
But I just want to note that at 27th and Highway 2, we have a situation that might be useful to look at, because There, we do have dual lefts if you're heading northbound, and you can make a U-turn
Yes.
in order to go back. And so that could be similar to what we're talking about here at 84th and Holdridge if you were to, in time, turn the one left turn lane into two, since there's room for two.
It seems like there's room for two, yeah.
And the other thing that would be similar is if you exit out of the apartment buildings that are just south of Highway 2 on 27th Street, you can't cross the median there. You're too close to the intersection. So you head south, and there is a spot that's specifically dedicated for U-turns for those folks, and it actually has a little cutout
Right.
on the side of the road there. So when you make a U-turn, you have
Michigan
extra
U-turn, right.
extra wide space to do it.
It's a name.
What's that?
It's called a Michigan.
A Michigan, okay. And what we have here, between Northwoods, we have a considerable distance before we get to the next street, which is Elizabeth Drive. And if there were a possibility of making a spot somewhere along that where you could turn right, and then there would be a dedicated left turn bay that allowed you to make a U-turn, and we actually gave a little extra space then for making the left turn on 84th Street. Those two things together, I think, could do a lot to give people a lot better access here and not have them all have to go through one spot and have a traffic jam.
Other questions? Yes.
If I may, there's always the economical issue. Some of the things that we've just discussed, is
Right.
that, I'm going to upset some people here probably, but is that a city responsibility? Is that a developer responsibility? How does that come about, if it were even possible?
Boy, I don't know what you all would say, but we'd certainly appreciate some help. I think on the traffic light issue, generally that's a city responsibility, but in how these streets are constructed, certainly, and it sounds like they're already built out, right? Yeah. So that would have been on the developer, but Holdridge is already designed and built and constructed. So as far as traffic signals, that's very costly. Michigan U-turns can be as well, establishing that. But signal timing type changes are a bit more manageable. That's helpful, but I think it is the city's responsibility, or would be.
John?
Well, don't assume anything.
All right. Sometimes I try to be too helpful.
Could we have the traffic and engineering department come back with maybe some thoughts about what we just discussed and what those costs might be? And even if they are city responsibilities, they might not be able to be implemented right away, but we could come up with some kind of a plan. We could see what kind of improvements we can make longer term. And I suppose we should at least have some discussion about, is there any impact from this project that would result in the developer having any responsibility? It's our responsibility to look into that, I suppose. Okay, thank you.
Doug?
Well, a part of the problem here is that the initial PUD would have allowed 96 apartments in it anyway, in lieu of the others. So now we're really arguing really essentially about the 50 apartments. We're not arguing the whole 96 because the original 96 would have been approved in the PUD. So but we're trying to make chicken soup out of something here. And I have a concern about the traffic, especially as the traffic now and more comes from east to west in the mornings, down the hill, right where we're going to have people trying to turn left across this. That's my only issue. I know you guys are not happy about the total apartments, but we can't. It's hard to go back and revisit history, and the 96 are in there. So,
Right. And if I can just add one thing, we've lived there since 2004, and with the businesses that have established themselves, the traffic flow over the last 5-6 years has pretty much doubled. And 2 years ago, when we had our meetings, I know this is all private land, but this intersection over in here, right over by Legends.
Need-
give us a minute, Matt.
Yep. This corner right here where you got to come down the hill is so tight. The developer back then said that they were going to modify that and cut the corner back to make it an easier turn and widen it out. They haven't done anything. And there's big, huge boulders right along the side of the road, and people have clipped them with their cars. And so my concern is, that they haven't done what they said they were going to do 2 years ago as far as modifying that intersection. So.
Mr. and Ms. Jonas, thank you very much for being here this afternoon.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Anyone else here wishing to speak in opposition to this item, please come forward. Seeing none, next item, Jones.
Oh, wait, rebuttal.
Oops. Rebuttal, I'm sorry.
Just a couple follow-up comments. I appreciate the comment from Doug that what we're looking at is basically adding 50 additional units. And we're not taking these 50 additional residential units and putting it on top of what's already approved and allowed out there. If we do 50 additional units, we have to do 79,000 square feet less of office or retail, which actually is more traffic than the additional 70 units of apartments. And that's what we can't lose sight of with this amendment. I can appreciate that there may be issues with traffic out here, but this amendment to the PUD does not increase the traffic issues, other than the fact that you finally have potentially raw ground being developed. But if it was developed for what was permitted today, it could have more impact than what we're asking for under this amendment. So we can't lose sight of that in the fact that there are traffic issues. And it's not the overall site developer who's in asking for this request. It's the specific property owner of these lots, the last 3 lots to develop in the development. So they don't really have control over the entire site. They'll be part of an association that could make modifications potentially to the internal traffic things, but they don't really have any control over what happens on the exterior streets, as that was determined basically a long time ago. So really not increasing the traffic. And then the other component with sort of the privacy issue, they could have apartments right up against their backyard. Right now, under what was approved in 2010, we could go out tomorrow and pull a building permit and put 2 big apartment buildings right there up against their property. So it's not changing that. And it's really not increasing the overall traffic, other than you potentially actually have some development of the site. So we can't lose focus of those 2 points when we're talking about the other, traffic concerns.
Well, let's make it clear, I didn't say I was happy about it.
I know you weren't happy with it,
I'm not thrilled
Doug,
with it, I just am a
but that's
realist.
what
I'm a realist, and that's what's there.
That's really
Okay.
what's already approved,
Just
and
so-
that's what we're looking
So we
at.
understand, and I appreciate it, and I want to make sure we keep the eye on what we have here.
Right.
Well, just about the internal road system, I guess the question would be, how might one go about pursuing the changes that were mentioned by the neighbors here?
I think there will be, because of the development of that area that's the hotel, there'll be a little bit of change at that corner there. There's a lot of some trees and rocks and landscaping there that may get changed a bit when that site actually develops. I don't know that they're going to go out and redesign the roads, but they may be putting some things in place that, make that a little bit easier to make that left turn when you come to that T intersection there. As far as any other changes to the internal site, that really would have to be looked at from a whole association standpoint of the property owners that make up that entire corner, because I'm sure everybody has an opinion about how things are working and what should be done and what the cost of doing those things would be.
Okay. Other questions? Seeing none? Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, the truth to the matter is that there was a decision made at one time that protected most of the landowners to the south, that there would not be traffic coming down the hill and through the residential area. And part of it is a reality issue that there is such a geographic difference from 84th Street down in to the valley or down into where these apartments are going to be. There's really only one way in and one way out of this, and that's why everybody is routed around. And my real concern about the apartments is that there's not going to be a way to even get to the way that Matt and them go around that. They're going to have to come back out the same way that they went into the parking lots. So that's a problem too.
And that, yeah, it's kind of reality that exists, whether it's apartments or whether it's office or retail in that area.
Okay, thank you. Next item, Joe.
I'll call items 10 and 11 together. Item 10 is change of Zone 1233, amending Title 27 of the Code zoning ordinance to reformat Chapter 27.72 height and lot regulations and to include regulations that were not carried over from Chapter 27.71 to 27.72 to provide clarification as to how uses are regulated by amending Chapters 2702 definitions, 2706 use groups, 2739 H1 interstate commercial district, 2762 conditional uses, 2763 special permits, 2769 signs, 2772 height and lot regulations. Item 11 is miscellaneous number 1218, application of the planning director to amend the City of Lincoln design standards by amending Chapter 3.5 landscaping and screening to provide clarification regarding screening requirements for motorized vehicle repair and service facilities.
Marvin Kraut, Planning Director, and that sounds much worse than it really is. Most of you will recall that back in June, we brought something that we called use groups. It was basically a reorganization of the whole zoning ordinance, and use groups was really just one chapter, but what we went through the zoning ordinance in a lot of different ways, reformatted, reorganized, rewrote to be simpler, to reduce the number of pages, I believe, and to be more of a readable document for people who may still have trouble sometimes, even in the new version, of finding their way through all the myriad of regulations that are in the zoning code. We came to you a couple of months later in September because we recognized a couple of immediate problems when people were applying for building permits. We took a few key changes directly to the City Council. This didn't have to go through the Planning Commission because they were technical ordinance corrections. They were errors and omissions, basically, in the translation from the old code to the new code as we were reformatting. But I did tell you at the time that I would be back, and here we are, and probably with more changes than I would have imagined at the time. But as we went through page after page, we realized that there were some additional errors and omissions, that in doing one thing, we left out something else, that there needed to be some clarifications in the language. And so, is this the last time that you'll see me on this item?
Yes.
You know, whatever you say, Jonathan. You know, I do believe this time Christy Eichhorn is here. She was in charge of this project from the beginning, worked through a lot of neighborhood groups and development groups to get to that first stage in June. We have since, with this version, we've sent it out to email lists of hundreds of people, both neighborhood people and development-related people in the community. We had a workshop with the Planning Commission. We went through all of this. There's nothing really substantive in terms of the changes that we're making here, and we had no questions and no opposition at the Planning Commission hearing. The Planning Commission was unanimous in recommending approval. Almost all of these are changes to the zoning code, but number 11 is a change to the design standards. And this is kind of, to give you an example of the nature of these changes, that's just a clarification where we have screening requirements for service and repair uses. And that generally means to people, when you say that, like contractors, yards, and those kinds of operations, we wanted to be sure to include motor vehicle service and repair operations. Those are automobile storage areas, and so the screening would apply to both motor vehicle service and repair and other kinds of service and repair. That's the nature of the kinds of changes we're making, either clarification or fixing errors and omissions. There are a couple of amendments that we did catch since the Planning Commission hearing, and so you have an amendment, I think, to number 10 to the zoning code. It's basically just two changes in citations, references to sections of the zoning code. And we just happened to catch. In one case, we were by mistake referring to the subdivision ordinance instead of to the zoning ordinance, and so that was an easy one to catch. Will we be back? Whoa, I wouldn't dare come back for at least another 6 months. But we think we've done a good job of catching it.
The clerk got that in the minutes. Thank you. Okay.
And if you have any questions, Christy is here to help me.
Questions? Thank you, Marvin. Next item.
Is there anyone?
Anyone else here wishing to speak in favor or in opposition to this item? Next item.
Okay. Item 12 is change of zone 1236. Application of Kevin Reinhardt for a change of zone from R2 residential to R2 residential district with landmark overlay, designating the Myron Wheeler House as a landmark on property generally located at 1717 D Street.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Kevin Reinhardt. I am standing up here in favor of this item. I currently live at